Okay, so thank you to all of you who have made it through this day of rethinking. Hopefully the last panel sort of brought you down to the realities of the water wastewater world, as Josiah and his team and the commissioners do each year. So now we're going to take it up to a slightly higher level. We're going to be rethinking the role of the government in water, which is obviously an important constituent here. And with that in mind, we have two special guests who are going to be doing an interactive dialogue. May Stevens, who is the CEO of, and I know this has changed in the recent week, right? Current Strategies, a dedicated lobbyist in DC just for water. And I think if there's one thing we all know in water, we need more communicators. And May is certainly one of the best ones, and one that is an advocate for water and companies across the board in the Capitol and in the federal government. So thank you for joining us, May. And Felicia Marcus, a founding member of the Water Policy Group. Thank you for being here, and lead us in terms of how we deal with and rethinking the role of government. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I am May Stevens. I'm the CEO of Current Strategies. This is like the second time I've ever said that out loud. So welcome, because we just formed the company this week. We're the only government affairs and public affairs firm in DC that's specifically dedicated to the water sector. So I'm very excited to be here with all of you that are very focused on water infrastructure and making our water safe and affordable for everyone. So really, really excited to be here. Today, we are focusing on a fundamental question, which is what is the role that government should play in aligning science, policy, investment in giving and providing safe and affordable water for everyone. And so we're going to explore funding gaps. We're going to explore regulatory shifts that are shaping the landscape, opportunities to strengthen infrastructure in communities across the country. And I am very honored to be joined by Felicia Marcus, who is a visiting fellow at Stanford, at Stanford's Water in the West program. She's a former chair of the California State Water Resources Control Board. But Felicia's experience spans sort of everything that you can possibly imagine in the water space. So from being at EPA Region 9 to leading LA's Public Works Department, where the rubber really hits the road. She has sort of done everything. And her experience is going to give us a very rare view into somebody who's sort of seen all of the perspectives that we've been talking about all day. She's sort of been in all of those roles and is very able to sort of tell us some lessons learned and really bring a lot of the messages that we've been hearing today home. And I will just say that Felicia is brilliant and funny and kind, and we're going to learn a lot. I think I am also going to learn a lot as well up here. So this is going to be a very fun conversation. But I also realize that this is the last panel. He's standing between you all and happy hour. So one, I really appreciate you guys for staying here, because I think this is going to be a really good panel. Also, I can tell that everybody in this room is really like the best of the best, the most dedicated of all of the most dedicated water folks. So thank you all for being here. Yes, absolutely. And I promise this is going to be worth the wait for drinks. So we'll be fast as well. So excellent. Okay, so from California droughts, PFAS, affordability, you've really seen how policy changes outcomes in the real world. What is one of the things that you've seen really good federal and state policymakers get right, and what is the one thing that you wish that some of them that shall remain nameless wish that they did better? I think so.
Is it on? Yeah. It's one of those let me count the ways. I mean, I should say thank you for that introduction. I mean, sometimes I refer to myself as the Forrest Gump of the environmental world, because I've been in every role, including being the lawyer suing the city of LA, and then I ended up running the department. I mean, I didn't plan that one. But there's something very humbling of going in and out, and I've gone in and out, and I've tended to be there when unprecedented disasters happen. So I actually, that has allowed me to see people at their best and their worst. And I will simply say that the folks who call on the better angels of their nature during a disaster do outnumber the opportunists. I'm thinking particularly about the drought and the drought opportunists, but they exist too. So, and I'll say one other thing from my vantage point. I've always sort of, for whatever reason, maybe because of being put in other people's shoes, approach things more like a Margaret Mead kind of a thing, anthropological thing, sort of see how people view things and how they do tend to become their jobs. And then so much of their sense of self comes from whatever that title is they have. And that's where the worst comes from, where people, sometimes it's because of a role in government, sometimes it's because of the professional silos that we create. They become a lawyer, which I was, but it never really was in my head. Become a lawyer, they become an engineer, they become a professor, they become an advocate, and they just become that and do just that. And they leave their human skills and their humanity at the door, but they don't need to. So if you remind them, they don't. So where I've seen government rise to the occasion and come together is usually in disasters, either through shame or because of it. I think of a few, and where they haven't, it's because they haven't been able to get out of their own way. And it depends. The ones that frost me the most, and I'll come up with a few examples, but the ones that frost me the most are when folks at the federal level think they're better or higher because they're federal.
Yeah.
And then you've got the state folks who think they're better than the locals, but having started particularly at the local level, that is where the rubber meets the road. Those guys in public works were the most impressive humans I had ever met. And of course, I'd been throwing rocks at them when I first started, but when I got the job, we had been monitoring consent decree for years and helping them come up with ideas, and we got them to want to do what we wanted them to do. Because even as activists, as my client was Heald Bay, we were focused on why not do this? Why can't you do this? And I think the best advocates that fit into this are the ones who see the people in government or the private sector, whoever's in the dynamic as humans. And I'll probably come back to that. And when you forget the humanity and just get into the role, particularly one where arrogance comes in, that's where things fall apart. So I think probably one of the best moments, and it wasn't easy and didn't happen overnight, was the Bay Delta Accord. And I could give you other examples where, everybody talks about the water wars in California and either misquote or can't attribute the quote to Mark Twain that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. And drinking will come up a few times in this conversation, I guarantee. And it was one of those times where we had a problem where the state of California had never actually set water quality standards under either the Clean Water Act or the Porter-Cologne Act, which predated the Clean Water Act. And Clean Water Act is very much based on California state law, which gets California kind of hot under the collar when you're a Fed trying to tell them what to do, even if they haven't done what they said they would do themselves. But that's another story. In any event, they hadn't done it. And so we were put in a position through litigation, but litigation that settled, where this is when I was the EPA regional administrator in the Clinton administration, where I walked into this job and the litigation had settled, and I was told that within 3 months we were going to propose water quality standards to impose upon the state of California, and we needed to figure out how to do that and then how to negotiate it. And what we had to do first was to get the federal government's act in order, because the state had accused us of not talking to each other. So why should we update your EPA standards when your Fish and Wildlife and National Marine Fisheries Service are just going to come in and do biological opinions that have nothing to do with that? And he had a good point, Pete Wilson. So we spent months creating Club Fed first. Eventually it became Cal Fed. But we Club Fed, and we fought with each other for a while, but we had to spend time listening to each other to try and get these things together. And it was a lot of human time. It was a fair amount of drinking and eating of food, but it was like really trying to even understand within the federal government, because the sibling rivalry at the same level of government can be harder to transcend than with a different level of government. I can get into that in a minute in terms of what I'm doing now, but it took us a lot of work. And then we decided that the way to do this was we wanted the state to succeed, because we wanted the state to be able to set their own standards, and the federal government could be the 800-pound gorilla they could blame for having to make a hard political decision, which is the federalism framework that many of you No, but frequently the federal government doesn't step up and do it. And the big question will be on the Colorado. Will they step up to give air cover for the states to come to the deal that they clearly can't come to by just locking them in a room? But we did that, but we did it by saying, okay, we've gotten our act together. We're now going to meet with all the state agencies, and we're going to have the stakeholders in the room at the same time. It was sort of death by meeting. But to make a long story short, we listened to everybody. Like my staff went out and I met with individual water utilities. We met with environmental groups. We met with, everyone to see what do you really want versus what you're arguing or telling us that somebody else is bad. And we constructed a deal that people kind of had to take and that we had to put them, that would at least move us, forward. So that was a long story, but there were problems all along the way, but ultimately we focused on bringing everybody along to get to the right thing. And as feds, though we technically had the power to impose our will, in reality, that would have been a bad kind of solution. And so we did remedial respect to everybody and really focused on what government ought to do, which is actually be listening to all the stakeholders. And when I interviewed for the water board job with Governor Brown, I told him I drank more alcohol on behalf of the environment than anybody knew. Because over and over again, even through this process, you had to go out. I drink frequently, but not a lot. I just want to be really clear. Sometimes it's coffee, all that sort of thing. But the key is that you need to have what, when I was at the Trust for Public Land, we called the 1,000 cups of tea that it took to make a deal, is that you have to talk to everybody individually to understand what their hopes and fears really are, to construct a solution that doesn't do violence to everybody else. And people don't tend to take the time to do that. I could give you other examples. The bad examples are where you either have fed or state or whatever with an overlay of just being political, or where you have the agencies at the same level of government fighting with each other. I could tell you about the things leading to the President's Ocean Conference, where you had the Marine Mineral Service, NOAA, and the Navy fighting over who owned the ocean and who was going to get the most face time with the president and the vice president. In all those meetings at EPA, I was like, I don't need to be in that room. We'll just help. And we did 1 million meetings with everybody, and we drank a lot with everybody, and we figured out, I got a husband out of that. So that was actually a good deal. But because he thought it was fun when it was all over. I hadn't occurred to me at the time. But to figure out what did the president and vice president need to deliver at the Oceans Conference for it to be successful. Same at the Tahoe Summit. So again, I think the best moments come when you see all the people in the room, what I call the challenge of ecosystem management, rather than just sticking with engineering, technical, or who's better than the other person. It's hard to say that where the feds did not, I can think of things that were bad, is assuming that they're better, not doing much to help during the drought at all, giving peanuts as money, because the federal government and the state government really need to put their money where their mouth is. And it was a little disappointing.
Love it. Did I tell you smart, funny, and kind here? I mean, this is going to be a good panel. Well, I wanna just jump off of what you were just saying and talk to us a little bit more about what the government should focus on directly versus what they should be sort of enabling the market to do, or what should local utilities solve. Where should that line be?
Well, I'll give you sort of my universal water answer, and it may apply to other things, and that's it depends. Because every place is different, every utility is different, every community is different interest, and to me, each problem is, I have some sense of what the federal government should do and state governments could do. I'm not trying to punt on that, but I do think at a general level, I'm kind of in the Malcolm Gladwell tipping point school, which is you figure out if there's something that needs to happen. Like I think two of us were just talking about groundwater management just between panels, and you have to think about how do you help the early adopters who are really trying to do something succeed. How do you create those conditions? Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's incentives. I've done a lot in strategic regulation in terms of how do you cut people slack who are trying to do something harder than the minimum? How do you acknowledge that they're trying to do more than the minimum? How do you understand the conditions in the place they are and how the one thing you're supposed to regulate, how it fits in with everything else they're trying to do, and help the ones who are trying to do something positive, either cutting them slack, giving them money, whatever it is. But then you've created a category of people who are doing the thing that you think ought to happen. And then when you go after the laggards, you're not a jackbooted thug anymore, just catching the guy in front of you. My bad experience with regulators at EPA when I was at Public Works helped me realize why the private sector was always so mad at regulators, which I clearly didn't know as a public interest lawyer who felt that EPA didn't do their job of enforcement. Because I just saw the things they weren't doing. But when I saw folks coming, for example, after the city of LA for like paperwork violations, and paperwork is important in maintaining it, and not going after the ones that were saying up yours to them that everybody in LA knew were the ones that were the laggards, it was infuriating. I mean, I had Ela Bay and others coming to our defense at things. It was like, we wanted you to help earlier, you weren't there, we did it ourselves, and now you're coming in on, you have no clue. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic. So you have to know where you are and use a suite of tools that are likely to work somewhere, and then you need to be intellectually consistent across it. I do think in water, and we'll probably get to this, but I do think in water there's a lot that the state and federal government can do to amp up attention without having to control it all. And I think EPA has done a particularly good job with the Water Recycling Action Plan, which has been fun to help them with in this time since I left the Water Board, where they're not using their regulatory authority, they're using their convening authority. And they're calling on people in the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and the utility sector to come together and figure out what do we need to do, and then they do projects that help in a lot of different places, but each one of those can set the standard to help many places. So it's knowing how to use the tools you have at the right time.
Yeah, no, that's these are all good. These are all great stories, and I think one thing that this reminded me of is that saying you have to build the friends before you need them, or make friends before you need them, because they're around when you need them, and that's something that I think federal and state regulators, that's not written into the Clean Water Act. It's not written into the Safe Drinking Water Act, is like, go out and make friends with these stakeholders before you start, yelling at them. But it's something that we have to do as we're all human, right? And so going back to your original point of the people who don't just leave their humanity at the door when they come to work, that's a big part of it, right? They'll be the ones that are able to make those friends. I think that's excellent. I think just to further sort of drill down on this, where is it, like, there's clearly a risk of the government doing too much or too little. How do we think about getting that balance, not just for regulators, but also for stakeholders as well? Yeah,
I think there's a bit of an intangible leadership piece to it, because there are some issues where you really do have to do a top-down framework, but you've got to know that there are people who want that. Like this was where I employed the drinking part, where when we were trying to do groundwater legislation in California, which took 100 years after the surface water system. This is one of the things where California, when it comes to our surface water rights system and our groundwater management, is like the worst. And where we pride ourselves on being kind of ahead of the curve on other things, but it took 100 years to do it. Again, politics, you understand it, and we sort of accreted things. But we knew from going out and spending time in the Valley, particularly with folks in agriculture as well as communities that were out of water, and I would love to talk about that effort, because that was a particularly good one, and a good one because of the leadership of the NGOs that were involved in particular. We knew, I'm not making this story up, though I know people think I do. I literally had farmers coming up to me in coffee shops and bars, grabbing my arm and saying, "You have to make us do this. Just don't say I told you so." And so it really does take a bit of deftness to figure out also what the framing of it and what would work. And if anybody's interested, cocktail hour, I can explain the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act framework, which is actually going pretty well 10 years on, at least in terms of how long I thought it would take to do with the early adopters and then bringing the laggards along. But it really takes thinking about the people behind all of it, which ultimately government is all of us. But sometimes people in government and utilities, particularly municipal utilities, even at public works, they think the public is trying to take something away from the government, or the thing is like, wait, we are them, they are us. Didn't you like take fourth grade civics? Or was I the only one listening? I mean, I may not teach it anymore, but I just, I understood even federalism when I was a little kid, so maybe I was just a geek, but people don't seem to quite understand how it can all work together, and that you need one or the other, the state or federal government, to be a backstop when the political winds shift and you end up with elected officials that are more politician than leader, which unfortunately happens more often than we would like it to.
Well, now I want to hear this story about communities running out of water and the good stakeholders that were doing stuff. So tell us that story.
Oh, no, it was incredible. So, and I didn't start this. I arrived in 2012 and then became the chair, I don't remember, in 2013, 2014, but the drought hit or was apparent in 2013, or right at the end of 2014, I think it got called. But in the Brown administration, he's the guy who sees 30 years ahead, and the whole energy efficiency and all that other miracle in California was something he started. He'd come in and he looked at climate change and he looked at water, and where California is so reliant on snowpack. It's a much longer story. I won't give you California Water 101, but he said, he didn't say holy crap. I said holy crap and other things. And he said, oh my God, we're going to be, this is going to make the water war seem like a picnic. So we got to do something. And in California, the discussions about water at the state level is kind of like an is so, is not, you're a jerk, no, I'm not kind of a thing, or a Monty Python thing where people keep talking past each other over the decades. I mean, after the Accord, I left for 7 years and went into land conservation to work with people who knew how to make a deal, and work with other people. So I didn't have to be the only one doing that. And then I got drawn back in when I went to NRDC almost immediately because they needed a social worker as they were doing some of the next ones. And then, eventually I went in, and he said, we have to just act. Everybody's just talking. And so we did an action plan that had like 10 things so that people could actually read it. And it says, we're not going to argue about which of these is most important. We're going to do all of them because, hello, there's this freight train of pain coming at us all in the next 2 or 3 decades. And I'm thinking about people's kids and grandkids. And so we had a plan that we could execute. And one of the things in it, in addition to getting groundwater management, was providing safe, clean, and affordable water to all, which was the first time I'd seen a governor do that. And the human right to water had just been passed for, I think, the 3rd time. It had been vetoed twice, and it didn't have any implementation. It just said it's the policy of the state of California. This is where the scaffolding of an idea can give you power. And so there were these amazing activists in the Central Valley with cultural allies in the mainstream community, the Community Water Center, the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and Clean Water Action as the ally. And they were incredible organizers who let their clients, having been a public interest, you let your client speak for yourself, as opposed to the public interest lawyers who want to speak for the little people. And it's really more about their ego than it is about actually helping their clients. When I write the book, I'll have a chapter called The Vanguard of the Proletariat for them, but they get in the way of a solution. These people would bring the most kick-ass approach to activism, people bringing the jars of brown water, and talking from the heart about their situation in their communities. But after doing that, which was really important to do to raise consciousness, they would then come and have a meeting and say, tell us why you can't do this. Don't you want to do this? And we're like, yeah, we want to do this. And then we'd explain why we couldn't, either financially or, in government, you can only do what you have authority to do. You can't just do whatever you want to do. And they went to the legislature and got us more authority to consolidate, more authority to appoint, authority. Every year they led it, and then the administration could agree to it. There's a long story about why that was really important. But we created a partnership. And we, when I suggested, for example, when we did the toughest irrigated lands water quality regs, that the ag folks and the water advocates actually had more in common than they realized, as opposed to having that traditional, we want to regulate every molecule of everything so anybody can drill a well anywhere in the Central Valley after decades of irrigated agriculture and get clean water, which would be the Superfund site from hell. I said, you only drink this much water. So why don't we focus on getting clean water to people? That's in your interest, ag, because right now you're proud of growing food or producing milk from your cows, but you're poisoning people's water. You can't like that. And they developed a coalition with the agricultural community to push for funding to help subsidize operation and maintenance, which we couldn't do without a funding source. We had eventually millions, if not billions, in capital, but you can't build a plant for somebody who can't even afford to pay for the chemicals and the operator. So it was one of these things where over a period of 10 years, they kept pushing, but they also understood what we needed, and we became friends, and we prioritized our enforcement and everything together. So it was really effective. I mean, when we were at Heal the Bay in LA, we did a similar thing, but it can't hold a candle to how good they deserve every award that was ever invented.
Love it.
And now 900,000 people have water who didn't 10 years ago. It's pretty incredible.
Amazing. This reminds me of the saying that I tell my staff all the time is what is optimal for me might not be optimal for you. And I think that what you're really hitting on is that if we're trying to do these really big things, right? If we're trying to create policies that affect people and utilities and ag and right, all of the different entities that need to be implementing and regulating and enforcing and all of this stuff, we really need to think about, okay, what is optimal to one group of stakeholders might not be optimal to another, and where can those Venn diagrams overlap? Yeah. That's what we need to work on. Right. Yeah, it's incredible. I do think the federal government and the state government can play. I just think that's the most important place to start, because you have that convening power or the suggestion power, yeah, because you have certain power, but you don't have all the power. And so that convening, because people will show up, and seeing people as people really changes the dynamic. Some people can do it, some people can't. Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. I want to change conversation really quickly to data. So throughout the day, basically every panel, we have talked about data in some way or another. So, and also in all of our lives, right? And we are going to leave here, we're going to go back to work, and we're going to ask questions. Oh, well, we have, we don't have the right data to make the right decisions, or we have the right data, but the people who need it don't have it, or it's not in the right format. I mean, I feel like I'm having conversations about data every minute of the day. So from your experience, and it feels like all of the experiences that you've talked about so far, you've needed data to be able to make the argument of what needs to happen and why. How can regulators and communities use that data to make smarter, faster decisions, especially when funding is constrained? Because that's a real problem, in the U.S. in 2025, especially in the water sector. So how are we going to use money, in a smarter way? It's an interesting question, because it's such a vastly changing landscape, right? Because the cost of sensors and data and all that, it's going to make it cheaper to be able to, hear where the leaks are and figure out how to spend a fraction of the amount of money, because you can pinpoint where you need to go, as opposed to repaving the streets on a yearly thing and replacing your pipes on a yearly thing, and then missing it a lot of the time as, Westwood explodes in that geyser that poor LADWP had to deal with a number of years ago. I think there's not anywhere near enough money invested in data, and then getting data systems to talk to each other. And I don't know about other states, but I think there was people make everything into a scandal, but I think the fiasco of a certain data transition, I think it was during the Davis administration or before, has put so many belts and suspenders on
changing a data system in the state of California, that it's a nightmare. I think one of the really good things that Gavin Newsom has done is he believes in data. He wrote that whole book. I thought he would do more, actually, considering that whole book. I was like, oh, finally, someone who's geeky enough to understand that this kind of infrastructure can help everybody, particularly in terms of transparency and making smart decisions, as opposed to the hunches that people have, or worse yet is where people are, you're looking at the audience and a decision maker thinks they're just trying to figure out who wins and loses, who can show up, as opposed to figuring out what the right answer is and then selling it or educating. So I just think there's a lot to be done. At the Water Board, our information, we had a guy, you have the IT folks and you have the information management folks, and he was just into open data. Some of the other agencies were not. And so there was friction. But we just put all our stuff there and did sort of those open data hackathons. And we found out stuff we didn't know. We said, tell us what we should know of the data we actually have. But what we weren't able to do, and some really interesting people came to talk to us from Deloitte and any other thing, to try and do a dashboard with our data, and we just couldn't do it. So I think there are all kinds of institutional barriers, but I think people realize, unless they're people who like to hoard the data, they're two different camps, it's difficult. So what California did, I didn't do this, I just watched it, the legislature decided to create a nonprofit that had representatives from ag, industry, NGOs, all kinds, and from the agencies, called the California Data Something Consortium, that so you have a group of people talking around about what should these be, and I'm hopeful that that's going to be a breakthrough. But the other issue is the money. Yeah. It's very hard to get the money to do this work because it seems nerdy to people, when in fact it's powerful. I mean, it's the analog of what we did in talking to everybody and forcing everybody to hear from each other during the Bay Delta Accord days, so that they had to hear the actual facts from other people, as opposed to talking to a seriatim in the hopes that they would win, which is what happens most of the time.
What would you say to people who want to hoard data, or who say, the public can't handle this information, or they're not going to understand it, and they're not going to see it in context, and so we can't make it public?
Well, I've been in those conversations, I mean, in every level of government. But, you look at the toxics release inventory, which was something we went to town on in the Clinton administration. It's like, just get it out there, and if it's wrong, people will correct us. But if we don't put it out there and make them report it, no one will. But it probably is responsible for more reduction of emissions than a lot of our regulatory stuff. And so I'm a believer in the government in the sunshine. But the argument isn't to hold it. The argument is to get the resources to put it out in a way that's more intelligible and at least tries to avoid folks taking advantage of things. You can't just put the raw data out there without some curation, but you shouldn't be hiding data. And when we did our water conservation, mandatory water conservation rules, I think we're the only people that ever done it. That it was Governor Brown's idea again, saying they're going to be mad, it's going to be disruptive if the drought's only 3 years, but if it's 10 years like Australia, everyone will be cursing us for letting them water their lawns and filling their swimming pools, and now they can't take a bath. So he's right, I guess. But it was awkward, and what we did every month, because we knew just regulation wouldn't do it, is we put out data. And I had some really good data people that we would spend a lot of time on how to put the data out. I tend to like the bubble charts, so that you could see the scale and the size, because a percentage wasn't fair, because the people who'd already conserved through multiple droughts, it's harder to get the next percentage, and this way you could see. So the data visualization that goes with those Excel spreadsheets, I think, was critically important to avoid people not understanding the data, but also not running off with bad stories. And then we put that out. We did a briefing for the media every single time it went out. And what we focused on was, here's what we think the big story is this month in this. And here's the story that you might see that's stupid and wrong, to try and avoid the negative story. So we actually curated for the media, making it easier to write a good story, but also harder to write a bad one. I only got burned a couple times by a reporter who had been told that something was wrong and ran with it anyway.
I love it. it really speaks to the need for really good communications and public affairs
It
people
does.
in Washington
Worth
in the water space. Yeah.
her weight in gold.
We didn't plan that.
No, I just met
thank you,
her,
ma'am.
so.
Okay, so last question, I promise, and then you're going a happy hour. This is great. I want to end on a really like hopeful, visionary note because I feel like the stories that you have told over the course of the last couple of minutes have been very much about a lot of hard work and then really impactful things that have been accomplished. So what is your vision for 2035? So 10 years from now, what would you love to see in the water space? What is like and you can limit it to like one thing if you don't want to tell us a whole story, but or tell us everything, it's fine. But the things that you think Washington should do specifically to sort of make that vision possible.
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I do think we need a national discussion about water, but it doesn't mean that Washington has to tell everybody what to do about water. And there are different aspects of water. And again, as you can tell, I think the role is to figure out what you can do to help lift everybody up and create that bottom line, just like we did in the environmental standards. But, again, you do have this kind of red line of water rights being very much the most sacrosanct of states' rights, except when the president wants to say something stupid about California water. I'll just say it. But you really need to think at a national level about where we strategically can help people. And you have the federal role where you have a multi-state thing, and but I know some people didn't like the idea of a national water commission when everybody's doing the transition papers for the Biden administration. But I do think we have a need for something like a commission or something that can write something that's concise yet comprehensive, that actually understands the civics of this and where we can be helpful. And it should include this revolution in technology that makes data more accessible, that makes systems talk to each other, that allows us to do more with less money. So I think there's a role. And in fact, I remember the Clinton, we did all of these clean tech things that I really think there's a role in helping promote technology that the energy world, because there's so much more money in it, has been able to capitalize on that the water sector has not. And we don't have time to talk about why that is, but water is so important that it needs to be elevated. People are starting to see the crisis thing and not take it for granted as much, but I think we need a very sophisticated conversation about these different roles and about the differences in different places. But you could put that in an intelligible, or talk about rethinking water. You could do this in an intelligible way if you had enough thoughtful people. I thought, when Leon Panetta led the Pew Oceans Commission, I did a spouse ride-along because I was I was between jobs. And, some people are just really good at going out and listening. They had good staff to distill, and they created a readable report with a few really strong recommendations and other ones. So I think we do need to think about it. I also think we need a Manhattan project on climate adaptation, where water, as has been said in different ways, is the bleeding edge. It's where it manifests, it's where people are hurt, whether it's drought, floods, sea level rise. You name it. You could even blame it for heat waves. It's all about the system. So we need a Manhattan project to raise water literacy and then put a lot of money into it, which would be money well spent and far more impactful. I hate that word. It would have, you know what I mean? I just think we need to elevate water. And I'll say one other thing on it. It's really interesting because in this water policy group that was mentioned, it's 10 of us from 6 different continents who have all had high-level water, national, federal, international roles. And we did this survey. We've done it 2 times. We're about to do it 3rd time, of national water ministers around the globe. And certain things come out loud and clear. Like the first one was, what's the greatest risk to water security? Climate change. And that's from the politicals. We want to see what the politicals thought, not the career guys. What's the biggest barrier? And that's come up already today in other fragmentation. Those 2 things. So we need to deal with both those, but that doesn't mean we need to consolidate all of our water agencies. I kind of like what Australia did, but So there are just fewer of them. But you don't want to do that at a national level. So
No, for sure.
those are some of the pieces.
No, absolutely. I was speaking with Travis Loop out in the hallway just a couple minutes ago about thinking about really elevating the water space and really expecting more from ourselves and our industry, and also really expecting more from stakeholders, from federal government, from state government. We are just as imperative to everybody's day-to-day life, all of the voters' lives, right? As energy, as transportation, as defense, right? We are foundational to every single person's life. Every business in this country is reliant on water infrastructure, and we don't feel in our sector, we don't represent ourselves in that way, and we don't act like we expect people to treat us like that is the service that we are providing humanity. So it is really it's amazing to speak with you, because it's just so inspirational. Yeah, for sure.
And I have to put human right to water in that list. I think Biden goes to heaven for all the money put into lead and tribal water. That's like the most important thing we could do as a nation. And I just hope it doesn't all get derailed.
Yeah, it's largest ever investment in the history of the United States into water infrastructure. It's amazing. Well, okay, so that is all for our time today. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for staying for so long. Really appreciate it. You've been a great audience. Now go out and mingle and have happy hour and enjoy yourselves and enjoy this amazing city. It's raining a little, but it's fine. It's a great city. So enjoy yourself. Thank you.